Okay, good morning, and thank you so much for the invitation and give these first comments on this issue, which is a little of jumping from one piece to another, because this is a very large area, as you understand. And taking the issue of diagnosis, there is no established diagnosis in Sweden, and I think in most countries, for this disease. And as you know, the dearest family member has many names. And this is what you can see in the Swedish literature and also internationally. And looking into ICD codes, there is just one which is established in Sweden, and that's the chronic fatigue syndrome. Let's see which way. Here it has the ICD code G93.3. And this is a problem because medical doctors, they really want to have an ICD code to diagnose the patient, to give the appropriate treatment, and also for the sick leave. So mostly these persons have sick leave diagnosis like chronic depression or some other psychiatric diagnosis, which goes further to the idea to give them cognitive therapy instead of an established medical treatment. I will jump into a few sections here very briefly. This is a court decision very recently in Norway. You can see up there that it was from 7th of May this year, and there was a father who has a son by now 15 years old who went to school where they transformed to the wireless connections, and he got quite typical electrosensitive symptoms and problems to go to school while the router was on, while the wireless equipment was there. The verdict from the court was that the father's complaint to the court that which was rather reasonable, to just have the wired connection during daytime and also to turn off the mobile phones during lessons. That's what he asked for. And this was rejected because the emissions are within the ICNIRP levels, so they are okay. And furthermore, the court decision was that there is no possibility to further appeal. I wonder if this can be sharpened a little. Or maybe you can read. It's anyway in Norwegian language, so that doesn't matter. But I can read. Well, the microwave syndrome, as we will hear later about, this is nothing new. In fact, there were reports in Russia from early 1960s, and I think Igor Belyayev knows more about this, which were published, unfortunately, only in Russian language. And these were persons, mostly in the military, who were exposed to radar equipment and other microwave resources. And you can see all these symptoms that were reported among these persons, and they are very well known when they talk about the situation in the society today. Actually, the Russian took some advice about these symptoms. They asked the persons to leave the job, I mean, exclude the exposure, to have physical exercise, to have a healthy food, and etc., which had some effect. Otherwise, as we understand, the electrosensitivity is a chronic disease, which is a problem for the young persons nowadays who get this in the school. The Swedish history, it started in the 1980s with a debate of miscarriage, which the women related to their monitor work. And this was, sorry, this goes on the other way. Yeah, sorry for this. So the Swedish Confederation of Professional Employees had a conference on that, and from that the TCO label of monitors came for computer displays, which was the start in Sweden. The monitor disease was first described in the mid-1980s by a Swedish dermatologist Björn Lagerholm at Karolinska Institute. And this was provoked by a woman who was a bank employee with monitor work and got some face problems with skin lesions that was similar to UV radiation or Bucky treatment of psoriasis. In the 1980s, there were more patients like that, which had the absence of fibers, and it was called elastosis senilis. That's the type you can get when you have in UV radiation for quite a long period. And he started to ask around, and there were more dermatologists in Sweden who had the same experience. And this was called rosacea-like, and they got some cortisone ointment with no improvement, actually. He also found that they had high levels of mast cells in their skin. And why did they get these mast cells? Was there some phototoxic reaction, a combination of chemicals and the radiation? So these were really the first reports of the skin lesions in these persons. Similar symptoms have been reported from the Gulf War in Kuwait with illness with different symptoms, where there was a combination of chemical exposure and microwaves. Also, the Balkan War had some similar, and also in the Silicon Valley, where persons who were in the very clean environment got different symptoms which could be related to microwave exposure and also the vapors that were present in the environment. Svenska Fläkt, that was a mechanic industry where there was an exposure to epoxy and also heat, and these persons developed similar problems with skin diseases and also those ones that are presented here. And this could be related actually to a combination of chemicals and radiation, but mostly chemicals. And technicians at Ericsson's in the early days got also similar problems related to both microwave exposure and to chemicals. So the question is if there is a combination. Are we discussing the same disease entity, or are these different diseases like multiple chemical sensitivity and electrohypersensitivity? We made a very small study on blood samples of electrohypersensitive persons, some only 13 persons, but actually we found that they had elevated levels of polybrominated diphenyl ethers, which are the flame retardants, which were significantly increased in these persons compared to the population levels. But there was not very interest in these findings, and as far as I know, chemical exposure in combination with electrohypersensitivity has been very little studied. What's the Swedish history about electrohypersensitivity? It started in 1987 with association for those diseases, and they were in 1994 members of the Swedish Disability Federation as number 29. And in 1995, the Swedish government decided that they should have a contribution to that organization by governmental money, just like other within this Swedish federation. And the Swedish parliament adopted from patient to subject a national plan for disability politics. And this included automatically then the electrohypersensitive persons. So they were not in specific aimed to as a disability part, but they were included in the whole lot of all these associations. And the national plan is for persons with working disability in general. No specific disability is pointed out, and no one is excluded. So that's the background. I will jump from that briefly to the discussion about another issue, and it's the brain tumor part, and just a few comments on that. because, as you know, Skinner has come out with a report, and they rely that there is no association between brain tumors and mobile phones based on a very bad Danish cohort study with lots of problems, but also the cancer registry data. These are the main issues, and they disregard case control studies. The same, this was written by Joachim Schütz at IARC, which is especially worrying, of course, because of his proposition. And then the WHO monograph, draft of the monograph on this issue came out some months ago, written by Maria Feisting at Karolinska Institute, and the epidemiology part says again that there is no association between mobile phones and cordless phones and brain tumors, and this is based on the Danish cohort study and the cancer registry data. What we did was that we looked into the Swedish data on patient records, the inpatient register, where everybody who comes with a diagnosis, and here is the importance to have an ICD code. So electrosensitive persons or multiple chemical persons would not, sensitive persons would not be registered in the Swedish patient registers, which makes again clear that we need to have an ICD code for these diseases, or this disease. Anyhow, when we look into the inpatient records, those who have come to the hospital from 1999 until 2013, and the diagnosis of brain tumors of unknown type. These are mainly based on my MRI and CT scans. And we can see that there is a sharp and significant increase in the number from 2007 or 8. And during the same time, or a few years previously, there is a sharp increase of the use of mobile phones, which is a break even from 2004. So there's a lag of 4 or 5 years, and then comes the increasing number of brain tumors. And this is even more shown in the death register in Sweden. So everybody who dies must, of course, have a diagnosis. And we can see here again the number of mobile phone use going very sharply up from 2004, and here is a break from 2008, 4 or 5 years later, of persons who die with an unknown brain tumor. And these are mostly glioblastomas, the most malignant type of brain tumor. And I mean, this is objective evidence that there is something happening with the number of brain tumor cases in Sweden, and this is statistically significant with a very high increased ratio for these tumors. Well, what has happened now very recently was that in May 8, 2015, Anders Albom at the Karolinska Institute wrote to the editor and said that I request that the article is retracted from the journal. And there is no scientific evidence, just that he thinks that this will blur the scientific discussion, which so far has been quite obvious that there is no established risk for brain tumors because the data do not show that in the register. So this gives, of course, a problem for those who say that. And this is the bell from ICNIRP, because as you know, Anders Albom was part of ICNIRP from 2008, and after that replaced by Maria Feisting, his protégé. And actually, as you know, Maria Feisting did write the monograph for WHO and the brain tumor part. And she was actually one of the referees and said all the time that reject the paper, while the 2 other referees were extremely positive to our publication. So that's how things are handled. Few journalists make an issue of this, or we need more people who dig into this. And one journalist who has done this is Robert James Parsons. I don't know if he's here, but anyhow, he wrote to the Swedish government and asked about the Swedish cancer register data. And the response was that those who want to use the data from the Swedish cancer register need to determine if the information is usable for the planned research. The data, that there is a problem with the data in the cancer registry is well known since before, actually since 2009, which they cite in the letter. So this is a strong evidence actually that the data cannot be used from the cancer registry as they are used by ICNIRP and WHO and Skinner. As you know, there are lots of conflicts of interests in this issue, and money talks as always. Companies have learned that small investments in doing shares, sponsoring research programs, and hiring professors can produce quite a lot of payoffs in generating reports, articles, reviews, books, etc. And these conflicts of interest are not always so obvious when one looks into the publications. And furthermore, that the experts in this field belong to a number of self-serving committees and organizations, and these expert clusters are inevitably linked into industry and industry initiatives. So if you look into these different committees around the world, especially in Europe at least, they are the same persons popping up everywhere. And people who have other views or try to be objective, they have no place in these committees. So in summary, electrohypersensitive syndrome is no established diagnostic criteria, and as Dominique Belpom has said, we need to have a diagnosis to move forward. I mean, this is nothing new. This has been around for decades, and we still don't have a diagnostic criteria. One problem is, of course, that these symptoms can, there's a variety of symptoms depending on the person who is affected, which gives, I mean, it's not as simple as having the ulcer in the stomach, for example. No ICD code. We need urgently an ICD code for this so that the medical system can handle these diseases, so we can get the statistics there and we can also get the treatment. There is no established treatment as far, but you know that there are lots of efforts to treat these persons. And also, this is a chronic disease. I mean, people learn how to handle the disease, but we need to have prevention, of course. And I'm especially worried, of course, of the school system where parents do not have any right to demand that the wired internet is used. Instead, it should be the wireless at every school in Sweden. And also, people who complain and take their children from the school, they are treated as almost like criminals, because by law, your child must go to school. So it's very problematic to handle this issue. John Le Carré has written something which is well worth to think about. How do these corporations achieve their stranglehold on our society? When they are not shooting, they are buying. They buy good minds and tie them to their wagon wheels. They buy students wet from their mothers and castrate their thought processes. They create false orthodoxies and impose censorship under the sham of political correctness. And this is nothing new. Already in 1884, Henrik Ibsen, a famous author in Norway, I'm back in Norwegian language, he published the book, The Enemy of the People. It was a doctor, a physician in the town who found that the diseases in the town, which were quite new, were created by the new public bath, which had a contamination, both of the bath and the environment. And he was very ill treated, also by the society, by the public, and by the community leaders. And he found finally that he was quite lonely fighting against this bath tube, because the economic interests were so large, and he was only supported by his family and one another person. So from that, I'm not quite positive about this area and how the tendency is going, because of the extremely large economic interests which are in the telecom industry. But I think this conference is a good way to at least lift a little of the shadows and try to go a bit further. Thank you so much.